In my last video, I said that Roscoe White moved to Fort Worth in May 1956 and began working for Convair and worked there until July 28, 1956. Convair is actually Convair, and I misstated the name of this company because it's spelled Convair in the Dallas police documents. Of course, Convair was a car, not a defense contractor. But Convair was a defense contractor, and that's where Roscoe worked. And Convair at the time of these events was owned by General Dynamics. In this FBI document about Robert Oswald, it says that he worked 18 months as a hydraulic mechanic for General Dynamics. But as I said before, General Dynamics owns Convair, and in his very own book, Lee, A Portrait of Lee Harvey Oswald by his brother Robert Oswald, Robert says that he worked for Convair. He never mentions working for General Dynamics. So I think it's pretty clear that Robert worked for Convair, which is the same place that Roscoe White worked. But did they work there at the same time? When I presented this information, it's not clear. In fact, it says here that, and I got this information from the interactive timeline, that Marguerite, Lee Harvey Oswald, and Robert moved to Collingwood Street in Fort Worth without clarifying where they came from. Well, Marguerite and Lee came from New Orleans, but Robert was already living in Fort Worth. And Robert explains this in his book. He says, "I had plans of my own and told Mother I felt she would be wiser to wait until Lee joined the service and then look for a place for herself. I knew by that time that I was going to marry Vada Mercer in November, and we wanted to find our own apartment. Mother was persistent, though. She found an apartment at 4936 Collingwood Avenue, then went back to New Orleans to pack her things and move. I agreed to move in with Mother and Lee to help pay the bills, with the understanding that I would move out when Vada and I married." So it's very clear that Robert is living in Fort Worth already before Marguerite and Lee moved there, and they moved there on July 1st, according to the landlord. It seems to not be stated anywhere the date at which Robert Oswald started working at Convair, but here in his Warren Commission testimony, they're talking about him being laid off from Convair because this is something that Robert and Lee had discussed in a letter or two letters, comparing capitalism to communism. In communism, you don't get laid off. But anyway, Mr. Jenner happens to ask Robert Oswald when he was laid off, and he says August 1957. So if he was laid off in August 1957, and the FBI is correct that he worked there for 18 months, well, that would mean that he started working for Convair about February 1956. And Roscoe White started working there in May 1956. So Robert Oswald is working at Convair for about 3 months before Roscoe White is, and this is difficult to find out. I had to go through a lot of searching documents just to find these little clues to put it together. Of course, Robert Oswald was not being investigated. His brother was. But it seems to me that such a thorough investigation should have got all these facts laid out real clear. But anyway, Brother Robert working with Roscoe. We don't know for sure that they knew each other, but this introduces the possibility, to me anyway, that Roscoe and Robert knew each other before Roscoe came to know Lee, as I think he probably did. So Robert Oswald might be involved in setting up Lee with Roscoe. I don't mean setting up his brother necessarily, but I mean it might be that Robert is involved somehow probably being used as a pawn by U.S. intelligence, I would think. And with that in mind, I'll read this little part from Robert's book. He's talking about a .22 rifle that Lee had purchased and then sold to Robert before he went into the Marine Corps. That is, before Lee went into the Marine Corps. And Robert says, "I remember that gun. It was a Marlin bolt-action .22 caliber rifle clip-fed. It wouldn't fire because the firing pin was broken. I don't know where Lee bought it, but he told me he paid about $16 or $18 for it and would sell it to me for $10. I said I thought I could have the gun repaired and bought it from him. One of the mechanics at Convair, where I was working, welded an extension on the firing pin for me, and I used it for a while to hunt squirrels." Now this stimulates a thought in my mind, because Roscoe White famously, if you study this stuff, famously died in a welding accident where he was burned. I don't know for certain that Roscoe White could weld at this time. This is before Roscoe went into the Marine Corps. I don't know where he learned welding. He didn't have a welding sort of job prior to this, but he worked at his stepfather's farm, I think it was. You might have occasion to do welding there. So it just introduces this interesting possibility that Roscoe White might have welded the firing pin extension onto this .22 for Robert, a gun which Lee Harvey Oswald did use when he, I don't know if it was when he came back on leave or when he came back to the United States. But you can't tell at what time Robert is saying this welding job was done, because in the context of what he's writing here, he doesn't keep things strictly chronological. So it's possible it could have been welded before Roscoe worked at Convair. But I think it's interesting that it's there. So that's it. The point really is just that Robert and Roscoe White worked at the same place at the same time just before that summer, when Roscoe, apparently for unknown reasons, quit working for Convair. And if he was still in Fort Worth anyway, there's no record of him having another job there. And Oswald, there's no record of him having a job. So things could have been cooked up. Friendships could have been forged. Maybe two commies got together, or maybe Roscoe pretended to be a commie while Lee really was, which is what I lean towards. It's all very speculative, but it's an excuse for a video. Roscoe and Robert worked for Convair at the same time.